How do you die by selfie? We'll take the tragic story of Maria Vargas Lopez. Ms. Lopez, a 59-year-old mother of three, was walking along the south rim of the Grand Canyon when she decided to take a few steps off the trail to get a better picture. And there she was taking a selfie on the rim of the Grand Canyon until, well, she wasn't. And they found her body 100 feet down. See, it happens more than you might think. Someone arrives at some scenic spot and they want to get the perfect picture. So there they are, taking a selfie on the edge of the world until, well, they're not. Now you may say to yourself, how can someone be that foolish? Well, they can be that way in the same way you are. Take it. Now you may have never said just one more step on the rim of the Grand Canyon, but guaranteed you've had a just one more moment, just one more bite, just one more serving, no, just one more round, just 5 minutes more, just one more episode. And whatever your just one more was, it turned out to be less. Sometimes much less. And the just one more doesn't need to be wrong. Often it isn't, as much as it is unwise. It's those moments when you skirt the edge, when you come close to the line. And of course, the danger is the closer you get to the edge, the more likely you are to fall over it. The closer you get to the line, the more likely you are to cross it. And that alone leads you nowhere good. It can lead you even to someplace dangerous, even deadly. Think about it this way, as the preacher Andy Stanley described it. When you see a toddler running around the edge of a pool, what do? Likely you react, oh, watch out. But hold on. That toddler is not drowning. That toddler is not even in the pool. That toddler is not even wet. Or as Andy Stanley puts it, at least not on the outside. So why do you react? It's because you realize that just one step in the wrong direction could lead to disaster, even death. And too often, you and I are like toddlers running around the edges of pools. We constantly push things to the edge, get too close to the line in ways that are unwise, that are foolish. And those ways lead you nowhere good. So how do you make better decisions and wiser choices? How do you live well, live wisely, well within the lines? Well, in these words, God shows you. And so let's take a moment and hear what God has to say. And these words come to us from a letter that Paul wrote to a church he started in a major ancient city called Ephesus. You can still see the ruins of that city today. It's in Turkey, near the city of Izmir. Listen and hear the word of the Lord. So be scrupulously watchful of how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise persons, redeeming the season, because the days are wicked. Do not be witless, therefore, but instead understand what the Lord's will is. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. There's something in you and I that gets tempted to get close to the line, to push the boundaries in ways that are risky, in ways that are unwise. So how do you learn to make better choices and wiser decisions? How do you learn to live wisely by living well within the lines? Well, here God tells you. You realize the love that went over the line for you. And before you can realize how that love can free you to live more wisely, you need to see what leads you to live foolishly, to live unwisely, to make risky decisions. Why is that? It all begins with a lie. A lie that the serpent told Eve in the garden. And even if you are familiar with this story, you might have missed this lie. For that story of Adam and Eve, and when they made their big mistake in the garden, it begins this way. Now the serpent was the most crafty of all the creatures that the Lord God had made. And the serpent said to the woman, "Did God say, you may not eat from any tree in the garden?" Did you catch the lie? Eve, to her credit, did. She immediately contradicts the serpent and says, no, we can eat from any tree in the garden, but one. But you see the strategy of the lie. The serpent takes God's minimal guidance and turns it into a maximum restriction. And that's because the serpent wants to plant a deeper lie. A lie of a God who limits you instead of frees you. A God who holds you back from life instead of giving you life and life abundantly. And as this image of God, this lie about God, that human beings get caught into believing again and again. Take our toddler running around the edge of the pool. These toddlers' parents have said many times, have warned about staying away from the edge of the pool. So why is the toddler there? Because the toddler is thinking, my parents aren't trying to stop me from dying. They're trying to stop me from living. I want to live life on the edge of the pool. And every time that you have said just one more, not in a good way, even in a time when something inside of you said, is this really a good idea? And yet you did it anyway. You were caught in that lie. You see, because here's the truth. Any freedom, if it's real freedom, has certain conditions. Let's say you're a fish. Actually, not hard to imagine on a day like today, all the rain. Well, what makes a fish free is to be the fishiest fish possible. And to live freely as a fish, you need water. In fact, being a fish, living as a fish, means swimming in that water, not flying in the air. In other words, freedom for a fish is to be a fish and not a bird. And so, the water in which the fish swims, the water that prevents them from hopping up on a branch and perching there, doesn't limit their freedom. It protects it. And in the same way, in the garden, when God warned Adam and Eve about this tree, God was protecting their freedom. God knew that this tree would not enhance their freedom, it would limit it. It would not give them life, it would take life away. Yet even there, God does not take the tree away. Even there, God offers them freedom. Freedom to choose, even if their choice is wrong. You see, the message of that story and the message of the words that you just heard from Paul are the same. That God did not come to limit you, God came to free you. That God offers you not a life of limits, but a life of limitless freedom. Freedom from the lie. And this lie limits your freedom. It promises you more, but in reality it gives you less. And so, as Paul puts it here, live wisely. Be careful how you walk. Redeem the season. In other words, don't waste your days by going in the direction of things that will not satisfy you. And not only that, but will actually take you away from what will. For any time we are lured to the direction of those lines, we're being drawn away from where true life lies. C.S. Lewis put it well. He wrote, "It seems that our Lord finds our desires not too great, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered us. We are like an ignorant child playing with mud pies in the slum, because we cannot imagine what it would be like to experience a holiday at the sea." As Lewis said, we are far too easily pleased. Yet, even knowing that, we can get caught up in the lie, in believing that over there lies more, when in reality, all that lies there is less. So how do you gain wisdom? How do you become free of the lie? Well, it begins with asking yourself a simple question. In a moment of decision, in a moment where you're tempted to come close to the line, you simply ask, is this really wise? And that alone can lead you from doing something foolish. I can give you an example from this morning. I was putting blueberries on my cereal, and I was tempted to live close to the line and not wash them. And I thought to myself, is this really wise? I said, look, it takes me a couple minutes to watch the blueberries. What's the big deal? And I watched them. Something silly, but wise. But it's not always that simple all the time. Because there are times when you can ask yourself the question, you can even know the answer that it's not wise, and yet you're so tempted to take it close to the line, to skirt the edges. Why is that? Well, again, as Paul puts it, the days are wicked. You live in a world saturated in the lie. And in that world, you hear again and again that more is more, even when it is less and less. And that lie leads to all sorts of heartbreak. You can even say it's leading to us willfully burning up our own planet. Now, the lie of this more that is less, it even infects religion. Religion, in an effort to contain the lie, begins to believe it needs more. More rules, more restrictions, more rituals. More, that actually becomes less. And then, even religion plays into the lie of the serpent, portraying the lie of a God of limits rather than a God of limitless freedom. So how do you get free? Well, you don't. You let the God who crossed every line, who broke every boundary, even that of death itself, you let that God free you. See, why did Jesus come? Jesus came to free you from the lure of the lie. Jesus came to free you from the limits of the lie. Jesus came and died for you to offer you limitless freedom, to free you to become who God created you to be, God's beloved children, heirs of God's limitless freedom. You see, these words that we read this morning, they happen in a larger context. In the words prior to this, Paul has given some specific examples of how the lie leads to self-destructive behaviors in our lives. But before all that, to set all these instructions up, Paul wrote this. He said, "Be imitators of God as beloved children. Walk in love as Jesus loved us and offered himself up for us, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice to God." And in those words, Paul is opening up the way to freedom from the lie. You see, God is telling you in these moments what God did for you to free you. And what did God in Jesus do for you? The limitless God became limited. The all-powerful God became powerless. The invulnerable one became vulnerable, woundable, even killable. And why did Jesus do those things? Jesus did it to show you that there is no line that God will not cross to give you God's limitless love, that there is no boundary, not even death itself, that God will not break to free you from the limits of the lie. See, it is this love that frees you, this love that we will celebrate at this table in just a few moments. Because in this love, you see the truth. You see a God who went to death and beyond to free you from the limits of the lie. You see a God who was willing to break every boundary in order to bring you home. In order to offer to you, as Paul puts it in yet another letter that he wrote, the glorious freedom of the children of God. See, because when Jesus came, Jesus did not just have the wisdom of God. Jesus is the wisdom of God. The wisdom that leads you away from the edges. The wisdom that leads you into freedom. And this wisdom in Jesus is something that can live within you. And as this wisdom dwells in you, then you more and more experience the God who yearns to give you more, not less. You experience the wisdom of God, a God of limitless love, a God of never-ending freedom, a God whose love for you frees you from the lure of the lie. And the more that love lives in you, the more it frees you to live wisely, to live well within the lines. For in that love, you become wiser. You become more loving. And then the lines no longer hold the same allure. For you see those lines for the lies that they are. Lines that offer you more when they only give less. So come to this table and taste and see the limitless love of God for you. The limitless freedom that God offers you. Come in this bread and this cup and experience the truth of a God who breaks every boundary to set you free. For here at this table, you can eat and drink the truth. And as you do, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.